Hello, everybody. I am David,
And I'm Tristan,
and we are the
the
Magic
Magic
Mechanics.
Mechanics.
Today, we'll be talking about the Epic ability. On Magic cards, the Epic ability states for the rest of the game you can't cast spells. At the beginning of each of your upkeeps, copy this spell except its Epic ability.
So when that happens, the Epic ability creates a delayed trigger and then an instant trigger when you cast the spell. And the first one is that you can't cast spells for the rest of the game, and then the delayed trigger is that you copy the spell at the beginning of each of your upkeeps for the rest of the game afterwards. This puts the spell on the stack when it's copied at the beginning of each of your upkeeps, so that it can be countered or responded to by an instant or other ability. If the spell also chooses a target, you may choose a different target each time.
There were only 5 of these Epic ability spells printed. Each of them are a sorcery, and there's one for each color from the Saviors of Kamigawa set. So the 2 colors I chose were green and white. The green sorcery is called Endless Swarm, and it's a 5 colorless, 3 forest cost spell. It says create a 1/1 green snake creature token for each card in your hand. The white sorcery is Enduring Ideal. It is a 5 colorless, 2 plains cost. It says search your library for an enchantment card and put it onto the battlefield. Then shuffle your library.
And the 2 that I chose to make my deck around were the blue one, Eternal Dominion, which is a 10 converted mana cost spell, 7 colorless, and 3 blue. And that one says search target opponent library for an artifact, creature, enchantment, or land card, and then put that card onto the battlefield under your control. Then that player shuffles their library. The black card set is called Never Ending Torment, and it's a 6 converted mana cost, 4 colorless, 2 black, and this one says search target player's library for X amount of cards, where X is the number of cards in your hand, and then exile them. Then that player shuffles their library.
The last one of the 5 is called Undying Flames. It's a 4 colorless, 2 mountain mana cost. And it says exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card. Undying Flame deals damage to any target equal to that card's converted mana cost.
So like I said earlier, I built my deck around the blue epic spell and the black one. And even though it is based around those two, it's only a mono blue deck. And basically what it tries to do is get out Leyline of Anticipation, which lets you cast these sorceries at instant speed. And then on turn 3, you can get out Omniscience by using Show and Tell. And it may give your opponent a slight advantage as well, but I mean, in the long run, it's definitely worth it. And then really, you just tried to play a lot of draw spells and things like Arcanus, the Omnipotent, and Thirst for Knowledge and stuff like that to help you draw a lot of cards. And then just cast, 2, 3, and maybe 4 of the epic spells and stack them on top of each other so that they can all resolve and you have multiple instances of the epic ability at the start of each one of your upkeeps.
So the 2 colors that I chose were again green and white. And one of the most popular things that I could find with those 2 colors was populate. So what I chose to do was use Tristani Selesnia's Voice and Tristani's Discordant. Both of those are phenomenal cards for populating your deck. And then I also have Growing Ranks, which at the beginning of your upkeep you populate. Again, it's all about populate for the deck that I chose. Another great enchantment that you can search for with the white epic ability is Divine Visitation. Those are the ones that I chose to do.
And neither one of us built a deck around the red card, but what you could do is use other enchantments such as Curse of the Bloodletting and Dictate of the Twin Gods, and there's also a creature that does the same thing, which is Fire Servant. And what all of those do is just double the red damage that you would do to an opponent, which is very useful considering what the red epic spell does. There's also other utility creatures such as Satyr Fire Dancer, and which allows you to do damage with an instant or sorcery from a red spell to an opponent, and then after you do that, you do the same amount of damage to one of their creatures that they control. And another utility creature would be like the Thermal Alchemist, which is that you could tap this creature and do 1 damage to each opponent, and then whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, it untaps. And so you could tap it at the end step of the opponent before you, And then whenever you copy Undying Flames at the beginning of your upkeep, the Thermal Alchemist will untap and you can tap it again for more damage. And then it could possibly be doing 2 damage every time you tap it because of the other enchantments that I mentioned earlier. And yeah, it could get really out of hand really fast.
So we already mentioned Leyline of Anticipation, that casts the spells at flash speed or instant speed. Another great artifact is actually Vidalcan Orrery, which does the same thing. If you don't want to play in blue, Vidalcan Orrery can go into any of the decks that you build. Some things that go well against epic abilities is counter spells. So there's several different good counter spells, or like Narcissus Reversal. It technically counters it, but it puts it back in their hand so they can play it again. An epic ability, it doesn't matter because it doesn't ever go to your hand. But counter spells are a great way to stop epic abilities, and Vidalcan Ori is a great way to play epic abilities.
Another fun card that you could put in an epic deck is Stronic Resonator, which is an artifact that only costs 2 to play. And you can pay 2 and tap it to copy target triggered ability. And if you remember, what activates the beginning of every one of your upkeeps is a triggered ability, so you could just double the amount of epic spells that you play depending on how many Stronic Resonators you have out on the field. And there's also spells like Reverberation, which once again just copy an instant or sorcery spell. And there's more than just Reverberation that does that, but like in red, Reverberation is only 2 red, and it's a big mana gain off of that.
So there's a lot of different things that you can do with the epic abilities. We chose a more casual way to play the game, but you could definitely break the format in a lot of ways. So some of the things that we came up with are in blue and white.
Yeah, so for blue and white, it's kind of similar to what you're doing in mono blue, where you cheat out Omniscience, but this time a combo that I like is Flood of Tears and Omniscience. And what Flood of Tears does, it returns all non-land permanents to their owner's hands. And if you return 4 or more of your own permanents, then you can put any permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield for free. And so when you do that, you just put Omniscience on the battlefield, and then you can just recast your board state again while everybody else has nothing. And another fun card to play after you do that is Armageddon, which destroys everybody's lands. And so not only did you just return their board state to their hand, they can no longer cast anything right now. And then I think that pretty much secures you the game.
Yeah, so again, that's like a couple different ways that you can break the format, but we like to play a little more casual, so we were trying to find a not budget friendly, but a little bit more budget friendlier to people who are kind of looking into the epic abilities. So yeah, I think you could break it, but the ones we built were pretty fun.
So there is a possibility where you could play all 5 of the epic spells in one deck. And I mean, I don't want to sound repetitive, but Omniscience is just really the way to go because you can cast anything for free. It can go in a variety of decks, not just epic, And that paired with either Vidalcan Orrery or Leyline of Anticipation, you can cast and stack as many epic spells as you want.
Yeah, again, so I tried to build a little bit away from Omniscience just to see how the epic ability worked. But obviously, Omniscience, Leyline, or Vidalcan Ori, all 3 of those in combination with each other is completely going to be the best option for you. Vidalcan Ori is much more expensive than Leyline of Anticipation. So that to me is a little bit better. And even though it is in blue and it's limited, it's still a phenomenal card where Vidalcan Ori you can play in any deck.
And even though we're just mentioning like the core of our combos and what we're trying to do, these decks, if you're playing them against like very optimized decks that people have, put a lot of research and thought and playtesting into, they're really slow because of just the high mana cost of all of the cards you're trying to play. Even if you do have the Omniscience combo, you still need to draw those cards. That's why I personally like mono blue because of all the draw, but still you can get mana screwed so you don't draw enough mana or you draw just mana. And then you could run out of draw cards, you could draw just counters. I mean, it's like any other deck, you have a lot of variables to take in consideration, and it is a really slow combo deck compared to other combo decks.
Yeah, so definitely do a lot of research before you get into any kind of ability that you're searching for, where that's what Tristan's great at. He does a lot of research where I'm learning it right now. But different combos can go in just about any deck, and blue is very strong at drawing cards. So you definitely need a draw mechanic. You need mana for any of these epic abilities. but definitely do a lot of research before you just jump right in.
And we like to do a lot of research, and then before we buy paper cards, we do all of our testing on Magic Online, which is a really convenient resource because, like, I think I paid for my deck like $10 or $12 at the most, and that was just because of omniscience and show and tell. Everything else was either like 10 cents or under, and so that's really nice. And like we were talking about, there's a lot of pros and cons to playing an epic deck. Like, if you don't get your board set up before you play an epic spell, then you there's a very high chance that you just lose. Like when we were play testing it, I got omniscience out on turn 3 and I was like, well, I guess I just play an epic spell. So I played it turn 3 and I severely lost that game because although I could play epic spell turn 3, that's all I had on the board was the epic spell. And so that wasn't very good strategy. Quickly learned from that.
Yeah, and again, like he mentioned before, just getting mana screwed. What I did was I had too high costed mana, so I was trying to get all the enchantments and all the things out that I could, and by that time I was down to 0 life. So you got to be careful on that front as well. So some of the things that we were trying to go over was okay, well, what's the balance between that? So we're talking about the pros and cons of the epic ability. So
Right, and so if we're playing just on one-on-one format, it's pretty straightforward on how aggressive you can and should be with an epic deck. But if you're playing in multiplayer, I think it's much harder to play epic in multiplayer because once you cast an epic spell or two or three, then at least in our play group, everyone would just focus us down till we died because that's such a clear advantage in some aspects, and you can't do anything to stop them. So might as well just attack them. Like, there's not a lot of politic your way out of that. Like, oh, I won't make these 12 1/1 green snakes that actually turn into 4/4
or with
angels.
divine visitation, they're 4/4 angels, like you just said. So again,
Right.
it's all a lot of politicking, but once you play the epic spells, there's no politicking. They know exactly what you're going to do every single upkeep. So that's the
Right.
downside.
Like David mentioned, by the time he played all of his high cost enchantments and got his engine up and running, I in my deck I had a few low cost creatures, but just over time they really eat away at your health bar if you don't have anything else on your board.
So definitely look up some like deck building tools. Tristan has some great options to look up, but learn how to like build a deck first before you just throw in all of the high costed cards because they look amazing, and it's because they're so amazing that they cost so much. So that's something you have to be wary of because even though it has everything you need for your deck and it costs 9, you might never get to play it because Tristan or somebody else is playing 1 and 2 drops that are going to kill you by turn 7.
Right. And so like with David's deck, my advice to him when we were building this and trying to figure out a way that he could sustain long enough to get to that all of his enchantments out on the board. It was, some mana ramp in green, which is very easy to do, and then stuff like Riss and Vitsugazi Guildmage that can help you pump out some cheap tokens at the beginning of the game, even if it's just for blockers. So in conclusion, Epic is a really fun ability and it's really interesting, and in my opinion, like all magic abilities and cards, there is a place for them if you build it in the correct way in the right deck. We would just like to thank all of the listeners for joining us this week, and hopefully next week you can join us for when we talk about the Cypher ability. And finally, if everybody would just like to go to our Facebook page and like it, and it's the Magic Mechanics, and then our Instagram, you could go follow that, and our Twitter as well, which is, you guessed it, at the Magic Mechanics, and then our YouTube channel, which is called The Magic Mechanics. You'll hear the same audio, but we'll also add visual aids and some of our gameplay on Magic Online of us testing out the decks.